Previously, we had shown you how to install a macOS inside a Windows-based machine, making this computer better known as a Hackintosh to the general community. Today, we will show you how to install Windows alongside macOS in harmony without any problems to the macOS or even Windows files in whatsoever condition. First of all, what you require is a USB drive so that you can install Windows inside your system. So here's a disclaimer. Apple and Windows don't work together hand in hand if they both are in the same hard drive. The reason being, Apple uses its own file system, that is APFS, while Windows uses its own file system, that is called NTFS. Now the question comes, what about your data? Well, that's where partitioning in Windows becomes very useful. Apple and Windows both read a common file format, that is exFAT. Because since the file format is very open source and it's usable very easily for both Windows and Mac, you can store your files over there while the operating systems can just load themselves from their respective file systems. So in order to make this work, what we are going to do is keep macOS in its own hard drive while Windows gets its own hard drive, while data gets accessed as an exFAT partition. It's that simple, correct? Not exactly. Here's how we begin. In macOS, what you need to do is, first of all, go to your launchpad and search for disk utility. Disk utility is here. Now choose the hard drive that you want to use for Windows partition. And please note, the hard drive that contains a macOS is listed as macOS over here. So let's choose a hard drive, something like this. In this case, it's a WDC, which is a 1 terabyte partition. And let's erase it. Let's name it as Windows. File format. As said earlier, Windows does not understand APFS and Mac does not understand APFS. So let's format it let's format it in a method that Mac and Windows both understand. That is exFAT. Yes, it's exFAT, and make sure it is GUID partition map or GPT because your system is currently running on UEFI if you have built your macOS earlier. Here goes erase. And that's that. That was the first step for preparing your system for Windows install. The second step is building a USB drive, which is listed earlier in our video. Here's another thing. If you don't know how to make a bootable Windows USB drive, like the one which you have made here, there is another video on our channel which tells you how to use it and how to make it, be it Windows or be it even Mac. Well, keeping that sorted, let's reboot. Okay, right now we are in a BIOS screen and we have disconnected the macOS drive along with the drive that contained all our data, just in case so as to avoid data loss. The reason why we disconnected a macOS drive was because normally if Windows detects an already existing EFI partition, it just overwrites it, removing Clover itself, and that's not good. So in order to save Clover bootloader, we have decided that we will disconnect the macOS drive and only connect the drive to the motherboard, which is empty and is ready to install Windows in. Another side note, here we are currently installing Windows because we had already installed Mac before. Make sure you do install macOS, and if you don't know how to do that, you can just check it out in the suggestions that we will give you. So let's go ahead and resume with the Windows setup. Currently we are in the BIOS screen just to make sure that the settings are correct. Like for example, in case of boot, we have enabled UEFI. Of course, we did that before as well during the Mac setup because Mac only loves UEFI. And secure boot is off. Whatever happens, keep secure boot off. Otherwise, only Windows will run and you won't be able to boot Mac at all. So once we made sure all the settings are correct, we'll now reboot the system. Right now we have rebooted our BIOS just so as to enter the boot menu, so as to select which kind of boot media do we want to load right now. In this case, I will be choosing the USB boot media just so as to install Windows in this system. Well, now the boot up is in process, and yes, we are here into the Windows boot. And yes, we are here into the Windows installation environment. Choose your appropriate language, your appropriate keyboard method, and proceed Let's install. Right now we have our own license key, so let's just skip this step. And let's choose the appropriate version of Windows that we want. Accept the license terms. Here we have to make sure we can't click upgrade, we have to choose custom whatsoever because we have to choose our drive. Now, you see this? Drive 0, partition 1, EFI, Windows and all. We just have to format the drive. So, just to make sure that your drives, you have only connected one drive, we will just look into this part. In order to do that, we can make sure using Shift F10, which brings in the built-in command prompt from the Windows installation media. Here we type disk part, which has now started, list disk, and this tells us two drives. The one, disk 0, is the hard drive that you're going to install your operating system in, and the second one is your boot media. Now we have confirmed that there's only one hard disk inside the system, and so we are leaving from here. Let's just delete everything, whatever has been built beforehand. Now, as we said earlier, we want to make sure that Windows and Mac work in harmony. So in order to do that, the first thing that we have to do is create a partition just for the Windows operating system. So I would just click new, create a 256,000 MB we have to create a 256,000 MB drive partition. This will only leave it with 256 GB only for Windows. Now you see here there's something called drive 0 unallocated space. That's not important right now. We'll do it once Windows is installed. Let's just proceed. Select the right partition. Let's proceed for the installation and let Windows do its job. Well, we are back with Windows. Before we get very overconfident and just connect a Mac drive and everything, we told you one thing before. That is getting Windows data accessible to Mac as well. That too, not just as a read and write. So let's proceed. Here, there's this thing called disk management in Windows, which is easily accessible by doing this. Windows key X and just type K, which highlights disk management, and that brings your disk management software up. Currently, over here in this screen you see, there's this partition of 681 GB which is unallocated. This needs to be assigned a partition. So let's start with that. New simple volume. Next, give it the full partition size. Assign a letter that is friendly to you. In this case, for me it's S. And rename it as something like share drive. But before you click next, make sure the file system you're formatting it is exFAT, because that's the format which Windows and Mac both understand and both can work together in harmony. And that's that. Your drive's mounted. That's it. That's all you need. Copy whatever data you want, download any movie you want, you can just play it here. If you have a document which you are editing in Windows and you want to continue the same work in Mac, you can do that here. Just use a driver. That's it. It's as simple as that. Well, that took a long time, and as we can see here, right now the boot manager is showing us both the options, that is boot Microsoft EFI from EFI, which is Windows, and the other one is boot macOS from macOS, the name of the drive that we called. So basically you can load Windows and Mac from the same machine. Right now, let's boot macOS. Now let's see what Windows has got in store for us. Well, that's Windows booted right in front of you. Yes, we made it work. Yes, Windows is booting correctly, Mac is booting correctly, albeit some small driver issues which will be sorted out later on. But yeah, we finally did it. We made Windows boot along with Mac from the same EFI bootloader, along with full functionality, be it Windows or Mac. You can do anything and you can access any file you want, just because we made sure that the files were stored in the partitions which Windows and Mac could read at the same time. For example, here you go. You have this drive over here, you have shared drive over here. Shared drive is even accessible from Mac. That's it. I think that's all we need. Well, as we said earlier, the disclaimer as it says, whatever happens, you can't put Windows and Mac together in the same drive. You have to make sure that Windows has its own drive while Mac has its own physical drive. That's all, folks. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give us a like, hit subs if you really loved it, and until the next video, stay rad.